The last few years of Utah football have been dominated by one quarterback, and that is Cam Rising. He's one of the more infamous players in recent memory, but after a terrible injury history, he decided to finally hang things up. Utah now has to move in a new direction at the quarterback spot, and luckily, they found a guy who could end up tearing up the Big 12, and his name is Devon Dampier. You probably don't know him because he played at New Mexico, but he's one of, if not the most underrated quarterbacks in this year's transfer portal, and in today's video, I'm going to talk about him, go through his journey, and why this guy is getting so much hype at Utah. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's get started and talk about Devon Dampier. So in order to understand how Devon got to this point, we first need to go back in time. Growing up in the state of Arizona, Dampier said, quote, "I've been doubted a lot. Well, growing up, a lot of people didn't think I could play at quarterback, so I've always had my parents behind my back, and when you have that love, it makes me want to grind harder each and every day." Dampier first waited his turn at Phoenix's prestigious Pinnacle High School, and then he went to Saguaro. He was a freshman on the varsity team at Pinnacle before taking over the reins the final game of the season as there was an injury. He would then start 7 more games for Pinnacle, and he would pass for 1,200 yards and 12 touchdowns, and also ran for 163 yards and 3 scores as well. Dampier ended up picking up an offer from Arizona that spring, and it looked like he was going to be the next big recruit. He was considered the next big thing since Spencer Rattler, but unfortunately, after leading the team in the playoffs as a freshman, his sophomore year just didn't go according to plan, and things kind of fell off a little bit. He would then transfer to Saguaro High School, but would have to sit out the first 5 games of the year due to Arizona's high school football rules. Apparently at the time, Dampier drew comparisons to Kyler Murray, but when he got to Saguaro, he was just a scout team quarterback. Eventually, he ended up rotating with their starter for the second half of the season and would take over full-time duties as a junior. He made plays with his legs and arms and actually won a state title with a 20-15 win over Chandler High School, which ended their string of 5 straight championships. Dampier said, quote, "I thank Pinnacle for the 2 years they gave me. They were able to start me my freshman year, and coming to Saguaro really elevated my game. All these other coaches have been by my side, and it's not just been about football." So Devon had a great arm and was extremely elusive and won a state title. And this led many people to think he'd get a ton of D1 attention, but it never really came to fruition. He was a 3-sport athlete, and his coach said, quote, "His playmaking ability is unmatched at the quarterback spot. He can make all the throws from the pocket, but his ability to extend plays and make the defense pay with his athleticism is what makes him special. His ability to process and anticipate is as good as I've ever seen." When watching Dampier, one college coach said, quote, "With Devon, you don't have to call the perfect play." He's also the starting point guard for Saguaro's basketball team and was the all-time record holder in javelin. He had a 3.8 GPA, and this guy seemed perfect. He was seen as the top quarterback in the state, but as I've said a couple times now, the offers just never came. He ended up having more than 3,700 total yards his senior year, as he passed for 2,400 and ran for 1,300, but many thought he was just a one-dimensional player who was better with his legs than his arm. He won the Ed Doherty Award, which is the equivalent of Arizona high school football's Heisman Trophy, and while his own coach thought he was going to be a Power 5 quarterback, it didn't happen. His head coach actually made this bold claim, saying, quote, "It's kind of going to be like Brock Purdy. I feel like Devon is that guy and will be that guy in college." Where would he end up going? Well, he got offers from Ivy League schools and then schools like Air Force, Northern Arizona, and Arizona, but he got to choose from 17 of them, and he ended up going to New Mexico. Part of the reason he wanted to go there is because the Lobos were not going to go after a transfer portal quarterback, and he would have an opportunity to play early. According to 24/7 Sports, Dampier was a 3-star recruit, the number 83 quarterback, and the 1,693rd best player in the class of 2023. So, how did he end up doing at New Mexico? Well, let's take a look. So when Devon arrived at New Mexico, nobody nationally knew who this guy was. I mean, can you really blame him? Only people who saw him play in Arizona knew he was going to take over once he got a chance. Back in 2023, Dampier would end up throwing for 525 yards and 6 touchdowns, while also rushing for 328 yards and 4 scores on the ground. He ended up splitting time with DC Tabscott, and he played in 9 games and started 1. Going into his sophomore year, he would get a chance to be quarterback 1, as they would host Montana State in their first game. Dampier would play okay in that first game, as he had about 200 yards and 2 total touchdowns, but then he took off. He had 5 touchdowns in a road loss against number 21 Arizona, and then had nearly 300 yards passing on the road against Auburn. He struggled with picks against Fresno State, and New Mexico was 0-4, but then he would help the team a lot. He helped them beat Air Force and Utah State, before also getting wins against San Diego State and Washington State. That game against Washington State really put him on the map and helped the New Mexico program a lot in general. And he credits his mom. He said, quote, "I always call my mom before the game, and that's what helps me settle down and keeps me grounded." In that game against a top 25 Washington State team, Dampier would end up having 4 total touchdowns, which included nearly 200 yards on the ground with 3 scored. They would lose their final game against Hawaii, and they would miss out on a bowl game, but as I said, that Washington State game was huge for them. At the time, Washington State had their own superstar quarterback in John Mateer, and Jake Dickert said, quote, "This Dampier quarterback is a problem. He has more yards from scrimmage than John does, and hopefully that wakes everybody up, and this guy's real. He's super fast, and he's one of the most explosive playmakers in the country." As I said, they won 38-35, and this was New Mexico's first win over a ranked opponent since 2003, and the first win at home against a ranked opponent since 1994. Coach Bronco Mendenhall said, quote, "I think that game and that win versus that opponent at this time ends up being a signature game for this program and in this era. Whether that's defining or a turning point, we will find out later, but it was meaningful." In total, Dampier ended up throwing for 2,300 yards and 12 touchdowns, and he also ran for 1,200 yards and 19 touchdowns. He was the catalyst for the Lobos' high-powered offense, which was 4th best in the country in yards with 484 a game, and number 27 in points with 33.5. The biggest knock on his game was his 12 interceptions, but against Power 5 competition, he really shined. Against Auburn, Arizona, and Washington State, Dampier threw for a combined 725 yards and 5 touchdowns, and ran for 354 more and 5 scores there. Coach Beck's spread offense had a heavy use of run and pass options, and after the season was over, Beck would take the job at Utah. This led many to believe that Dampier would follow suit, and after he entered the portal, he got offers from programs all over the country, but it was impossible to pass up on Coach Beck, and he decided to go to Utah. Cam Rising was obviously gone, Isaac Wilson also was at the portal at the time, and it looked like it was Dampier's job to lose. He said, quote, "I trust Coach Beck, and obviously because I just had a season with him, I know what the offense can do, and I believe we can go far here." Utah returns 5 starters on the offensive line, so Dampier should be well protected, and in their spring game, he already made a name for himself. He's become a local legend around the Utah area, and he's developed a close relationship with his offensive line. Utah will now move on from Cam Rising, who's been there for about 50 or 60 years, and Dampier said, quote, "I feel like the biggest part is definitely showing at first. In our workouts, I give 100%. And it doesn't matter what position they are, I want to get close with everybody so they can feel that I care and trust them." Utah will now move forward with Dampier as their starting quarterback, and there's still a long way to go before they establish an offensive identity. They also ended up grabbing one of the top running backs out of the portal in Wayshawn Parker from Washington State, so Utah should have a pretty good running game. The wide receiver spot is still open, to be honest, but getting guys like Utah State transfer Otto Tia and Mississippi State transfer Creed Whittemore will definitely help them out. I don't think Utah will be the best passing team in the world next year, but it's pretty obvious they can run the ball. Back in 2021 and 2022, Utah made runs to the Pac-12 championship, and as they've gotten over to the Big 12, many believe they were a top 3, if not the top program in the conference, but last year's poor season left a sour taste in their mouth, and Utah fans are trying to find a guy who can lead them back and loves being there. Dampier said, quote, "I feel the love here. Utah expects a lot of their football team, and I'm going to make sure that I deliver." Utah has never had an 1,000-yard rusher at the quarterback spot, and while some quarterbacks have shown the ability to run the ball in the past, Dampier does it at a level that hasn't been seen since Alex Smith all the way back in 2004. Dampier is a fantastic runner, but as I said, this is only half of the equation. The scouts were sort of right coming out of high school, as he's not very accurate and struggles with turnovers. He completed just 58% of his passes and had a 1-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio. He absolutely has to get that cleaned up for next year, or if not, Utah will be at the bottom of the Big 12, and Dampier might get benched. Turnovers and incompletions do not lead to wins, but this guy has a lot of potential. Going from a 2-star recruit who was compared to Brock Purdy coming out of high school, he sort of delivered on it. Now he just has to have a couple of good years, become Mr. Irrelevant, and then sign a mega contract in the NFL. Obviously, I'm joking a little bit there, as I don't think that's going to happen, but Dampier is one of the most underrated quarterbacks in the portal, and in turn in the country, because nobody really knew about him. New Mexico doesn't produce that many big-time names in college football, but maybe he will help put both Utah and New Mexico back on the map after a big 2025 season. But what do you guys think? If you're a New Mexico or a Utah fan, what do you think of Devon Dampier? How do you think he will do this year? And who's another underrated quarterback I could do a profile on next? Be sure to let me know down below, leave a like if you're going to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out one of the videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.